As we head deeper into the final saga of One Piece, we're learning more and more about the past generations that predate the Great Pirate Era that started 24 years ago. Many strong pirates, marines, government officials and so on have been introduced, with their stature being highlighted within those eras. So I figured it'd be a fun exercise to analyze and crown the strongest figure in the major eras in One Piece. Before we delve into it though, be sure to hype this up by hitting the button by the comments and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy content like this, and we'll kick things off with the Void Century. This blank period in history 800 to 900 years ago is still shrouded with mystery even after 1100 chapters. The three main figures who dominated this era were the first pirate Joy Boy, the suspected immortal Nerona Emu, and potentially the forefather of the Davy clan, Davy Jones. Davy Jones is completely featless, however he's pretty much considered a man of myth that the pirate world recognized as the origin of the Davy Back games. Since he's the forefather to both Zebek and Blackbeard, he's more than likely extremely powerful and potentially Joy Boy's main pirate rival at the time. According to Zebek, Davy Jones was the former king of the world who is potentially feared by Emu. Some even theorize that Davy Jones and Joy Boy are the same person, and because he's still a mystery, that's all that we can really say about him whilst being open to that theory. Emu on the other hand has started to show a glimpse of his power in Elbaf through St. Gunko. His conquest haki alone was so powerful that it covered everything from the Sun Realm down to the underworld, and it had everyone there take notice of it, including Gaban and Luffy. Loki commented on Emu's haki being preposterous, and he felt like his power was needed in assisting the others against a mere projection of Emu's full power. As the king of the Celestial Dragons, naturally he would scale above his fighting forces, including the Holy Knights and the Five Elders. The most prominent Holy Knight being Shamrock is confident he can take on Loki, who is so strong that Gaban had to test Luffy's Kaido defeating power to be confident he can deal with the potential threat of Loki. During the God Valley incident, Emu took control over Saturn's body and was able to resist and regenerate from the combined attacks of Zebek, Roger, Garp, Whitebeard, Big Mom and Kaido. 4 of the 5 were all using Conqueror's haki infused in their techniques, and it was still ineffective. As of this recording, we still don't know how exactly the immortality of the Celestials is countered, and the only clue we have is Gaban's emphasis on Conqueror's haki. Depending on how Luffy and the others perform against Emu, it will give us more insight to how Emu can be defeated. Lastly, we have Joy Boy, who was the previous user of the mythical Zoan Nika. Little is known of his true power, however just off his Conqueror's haki that was sealed within Emet, it shocked Dory and Broggy that it was even stronger than Shanks' haki. Just off the sheer pressure of his haki, 4 of the 5 elders were knocked out of their Zoan forms, similar to what Shanks did to Greenbull. The reason why he was arguably the strongest during his era was because when Emu felt Joy Boy's haki, he dropped to his knees, screamed and started huffing in shock. To give Emu some bail here, he might have reacted to this because he didn't expect to feel the presence of a great enemy that has long been dead. After all, Emu clearly won the war against the Ancient Kingdom, but to be fair, we don't know the full context of Joy Boy's defeat. Emu also scoffed at the idea that he fears Joy Boy and Davy Jones, but bravado alone only goes so far, and he was still very persistent on making sure figures like them don't show up again, so who knows. All in all, it's still a very bad look for Emu and portrays Joy Boy as the strongest during the Void Century as of this recording. Personally, I'm still holding onto my Emu stock as the strongest since he's most likely the final antagonist, but the evidence against him for now definitely is damning to say the least. Fast forward several centuries, about 400 years ago, the great explorer Nolan discovered the city of gold Shandora. Around this time, Shimotsuki Ryuma had turned his life into a legend as an undefeated great swordsman who cut down his challenges in an instant. He only passed away due to an illness and was later consecrated as the god of the blade alongside his black blade Shusui, which became a national treasure. He was the sole protector of Wano, who defended it against both pirates and world nobles alike that attempted to plunder the land's resources. Oda confirmed that the Ryuma in the Monsters one-shot manga is the same Ryuma in One Piece, and in Monsters, Ryuma was nicknamed King, who was the strongest in the world. Ryuma's overwhelming strength stood as a declaration that there are strong samurai in Wano, and his legacy persisted as a continuous deterrence that is feared by the outside world and has protected the country for centuries after he passed away. After the people of Wano learned that the one who defeated Kaido was named Joy Boy, they considered him a hero on par with Ryuma. So at the very least, Ryuma is stronger than the likes of Kaido. If you want to gas Ryuma a bit more, you could read into this line a bit further than the surface and maybe argue that Oda is narratively holding Ryuma to the same pedestal of the actual Joy Boy. What Joy Boy is for Luffy is essentially what Ryuma is for Zoro as an end of series narrative benchmark, which is all the more stock for him in terms of how the narrative portrays his strength. Fast forward again to just over a century before the current story, the most feared thing in the sea was unanimously known to be the giant pirate crew. They were led by the combined strength and leadership of Dory and Broggy, who have garnered bounties of 1.8 billion in the current day. Elbaf was always the strongest nation, so it's no surprise that they raised the most feared pirates during this era. However, the strongest was the ancient giant King Harold. Due to his ancient giant blood, he was gifted with abnormal strength and size even compared to the likes of Dory and Broggy. At his peak, he was a rival to Xebec in terms of strength, and the power of their first encounter alone was a clash of Conqueror's Haki strong enough to blast away everything within a 5-kilometer radius. Harold's peak bleeds into the next era, which was reigned by Rocks and primarily dominated by Xebec, Roger and Garp. During this era, Xebec was the king of the sea and led the strongest crew, which featured the likes of Newgate, Shiki, Linland and the young Kaido. He stated multiple times to be the strongest enemy Roger ever faced, which includes Whitebeard in his prime. Some may contest to this by arguing that it's only in reference to Xebec after he's been amped by Domi Reversi, however this is unlikely. The fact that Sengoku said that he perhaps or might have been Roger's strongest enemy makes this a speculative or probabilistic claim, which would only make sense if Xebec is comparable to very strong enemies of Roger like Whitebeard. It'd be weird to be uncertain of Domi Reversi's Xebec being Roger's strongest enemy when it took both Garp and Roger teaming up to overcome him. This is also reiterated in issue 40 of the Weekly Jump magazine and is presented as what Xebec's lore actually is, as opposed to it being a reference to an unconventional power-up he received at the very end of his life. However, if we get new information about Xebec, such as through his future Vivrecard entry that suggests it's because of Domi Reversi that he's Roger's strongest enemy, then we can reevaluate his position. Nonetheless, since we're time locking the scale into this era, base Xebec is still clearly portrayed to be the strongest. Even though Roger and Garp were both making waves during this period, as the narrator put it, Rocks was clearly the leading figure during this time and defined the era. This is also supported by Roger being unable to get past Whitebeard to get to Shaki, and given the scale of their brief fight, it just portrays the two of them as being on the same level. Garp would also be on this level as well, as he's already been shown fighting Roger as equals even before God Valley, so all this is just more stock for Xebec, who was Whitebeard's captain. Just for some perspective, both Roger and Garp didn't reach their respective primes until after this period. For example, Garp only earned the Fist epithet 30 years ago after training to overwhelm Don Chin Chao in a clash of Haki. In fact, it's stated in One Piece Magazine 8 that Garp frequently fought Chin Chao, which is implied in the manga, as Garp says that today will be the day that he finally smashes his head. However, despite being known as a hero, Garp couldn't easily settle things until 30 years ago, where he defeated Chin Chao in one strike. Chin Chao is credited for having a good match, but ultimately Garp proved to be a step above. In Roger's case, his growth after God Valley isn't as clear, with the earliest time we know to be his prime being 2 years after the God Valley incident, according to Oda's notes in the Film Z magazine. 5 years after the God Valley incident, it's narrated that the pirates that went on their separate ways would go on to peak as defining faces of their generation, with Roger going on to becoming the Pirate King at the end of his era. As I alluded to in the previous section, Harold was the closest not only in camaraderie but in terms of strength to Xebec. After Harold was tasked by the Gorosei to eliminate Xebec, they fought on even footing, with the fight ending without a winner. At face value, they seem to be very close in power to one another, however the course of their fight makes it more nuanced. The only skepticism to their relativity would be due to their friendship, as Harold initially wavered on the idea, but then resolved himself for the betterment of Elbaf's future, even if it meant eliminating a friend, whereas Xebec is fighting to resist Harold's decision and make his friend see sense. If anything, Xebec was less resolved and had previously rejected the suggestion from Kaido to just trump Harold with his strength for the sake of his goals. So given their respective motivations and personal conflictions, the fact that they fought to the point they couldn't see eye to eye may just be the inevitable outcome of a fight like this between two top tiers, rather than an accurate representation of how their full powers compare. So to put it simply, at face value they seem to be nigh equals, but due to the cause and nature of their fight, there's a window for different scaling interpretations, even if it's not as concrete as of this recording. Ultimately, what gives the edge to Xebec is not only his narrative position as being the king of this era, but in One Piece magazine 17, he's flat out stated to be the strongest in the world during this period. The fact that the world falsely believed that Garp was the strongest due to allegedly defeating Xebec by himself is actually just more stock for Xebec, as he became the measuring stick to be the strongest. So any case you could make for someone else in this era is very easily trumped by a direct statement or narrative argument in favor of Xebec. Up next we have Roger's era, which spans from 24 to 38 years ago. This era was defined by the Pirate King, who achieved the unprecedented feat of doing a full circumnavigation of the world and reaching Lafta. The balance of power on the seas during this period was primarily dominated by Roger, Whitebeard and Shiki, with Garp and Sengoku being their main marine rivals. Even though Roger is known for conquering the seas, the one recognized as the strongest was actually Whitebeard. In Whitebeard's second Vivicard entry, he's stated to be the world's strongest great pirate that accepted Odin, meaning he was already considered as such in the middle of Roger's era before he contracted his illness. Not only that, but in One Piece magazine 8, it covers Roger's generation and dubs Whitebeard as the world's strongest man during this period as well. This would include Harold, who rivaled Xebec, which shows that Roger, Garp and Whitebeard all grew to that level after the God Valley incident. Even before Whitebeard's prime, he was strong enough to have a brief power struggle with a dummy reversey Xebec, which caused the collapse of one of the mountains. Even though Whitebeard was shortly overpowered, he was still able to endure it comfortably as he got up from this shortly after with no significant injuries. In his prime, Whitebeard's haki was strong enough to match Roger's, and the two went on to fight evenly for 3 days and 3 nights. There's a big misconception amongst most fans that since Roger was the Pirate King, he was therefore the strongest, which isn't an unreasonable conclusion at face value given the prestige the narrative places on him. However, as the story has progressed, we have more clarity on how Roger achieved his title and more information on the strength of his contemporaries. Some Roger as the strongest advocates may use the same magazine 8 I just used for Whitebeard and highlight this mistranslated sentence stating that Roger had surpassed his rivals. However, what the full passage actually covers is Roger's legend of being the Pirate King and how he became known for reigning alone by achieving the monumental feat of reaching the final island. What's actually stated is that Roger beat his rivals to it, not that he surpassed them, and that Whitebeard and Shiki were near equals to the Pirate King in terms of specifically rank or standing. In other words, Whitebeard and Shiki were near equals in terms of greatness or prestige, and it wasn't a comment on how their strength compared to Roger's. This more accurately represents what Shiki meant by Roger being the wall that stopped them from supremacy, as he became the greatest pirate who beat them to the top of the sea. The narrator also supports this sentiment, as whilst all the top pirates battled over territory, the one crew that broke through were the Roger pirates, who achieved the impossible feat of circumnavigating the entire world. That's the way in which Roger separated himself from his rivals and reached the top of the sea. We also know Whitebeard had no interest in Roger's treasure and the One Piece, as he reluctantly let Odin join Roger to help him find the final island. It's stated in the manga that Roger was hailed as the king of the seas for being the first man to complete a full circumnavigation of the world. Roger was the one to have conquered the seas due to the circumnavigation and was named the Pirate King because of it. So this idea that Roger became the greatest pirate due to having superior combat ability is a baseless position. Even Roger himself deemed finding the final island would be a feat worthy of being the greatest pirate, so this isn't just an ununiformed opinion the world made. In the current day, Chinchao describes the Pirate King as the supreme king who stands atop supreme kings. However, the context of this subject is only for the current day. Chinchao started this conversation in response to Luffy's demonstration of Conqueror's Haki and ended it by chastising Luffy's strength and suggestion that he can trounce the Yonko and the Admirals to surpass Roger. This criteria to be Pirate King and the hurdles Luffy needs to overcome didn't exist in Roger's era, as there wasn't a uniformed contest of supremacy over a treasure like the One Piece. Similarly, Kaido's claim that Roger was able to conquer the sea due to the strength of his haki isn't exactly accurate for similar reasons as I just said, but in order to compete on the same seas as Whitebeard and Shiki, he had to have transcendent haki. Narratively, Kaido's emphasis on haki transcending all is less about how Roger did it, but more so how it portrays him to be of a higher caliber than the likes of Kaido and what it takes to stand at the top in the current era. Garp was also a major counterforce to these great pirates, who had multiple battles to the death with Roger even before this era. In general, this period could be said to be a generation of mutual recognition where all the great powers developed a level of respect for each other as they battled for supremacy. If we're being genuine, Garp doesn't have an argument to be the strongest here, with the only thing some would argue against Whitebeard for would be their interaction during God Valley. Despite this occurring before their respective primes, some would disingenuously argue that Garp forcing Whitebeard to disengage is Oda implicitly saying that Garp is stronger. However, this interpretation falls flat on its face when Whitebeard later shows he can stonewall Roger, meaning the disengagement is simply not to waste time when their goal was to save Shaki rather than a concession to Garp's strength. Other than that, Garp doesn't have any favourable statements like Whitebeard, and even in their old age, Whitebeard's constantly put on a slightly higher pedestal. Roger and Whitebeard are the only ones with statements directly putting them as equals when they fought, whereas Garp is more so implied to be an equal due to cornering Roger and engaging in multiple death matches. Make no mistake, these guys are all very close in power, but in order to make distinctions between the so-called equal men, we're forced to split hairs, which is why Whitebeard has a more favourable position as the strongest due to the statements he alone has. I think a more interesting conversation within this era is how Roger and Garp compare to Harold, as neither of them have shown any individual feats against Zebek, whereas Harold had the chance to show his might as an equal. Personally, I don't have a strong opinion on who would be the stronger of the three, and you could make a case for any one of them, so I'm a bit indifferent to any stance. Long story short, between the battles of the great pirates and marines of this era, One Piece Magazine 8 summarizes this very well as a generation of struggle for supremacy and a generation of mutual recognition. Roger reigned alone in this era as the king who achieved the unprecedented feat of circumnavigating the world and reaching Laftel. However, the strongest of this era is Whitebeard, who held the title of the world's strongest man. That's all for this part of the strongest in each era, and we'll follow this up with the Great Pirate era and the new era in due time, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. I've been the one and only Zage, and until next time.